Hi, and welcome to the Let's K12 Better podcast. This podcast is a project between Mom of All Capes and her kids.
Hi!
In our podcast, we will cover a variety of subjects involving K12 education and family life.
We will talk about the ways that parents, kids, and educators can improve K12 education and family life.
We encourage you to join our conversation on social media using the hashtag Let's K12 Better.
Let's jump into episode 7 of the Let's K12 Better podcast.
I've been thinking a lot about how parents can talk to kids about race. And as a country, we've got a lot of work to do. But if I must be honest, Black families and non-Black families of color are often forced to talk about race at some point before their child leaves their home. This discussion might come as a result of an isolated event at school, something that happened to a family member, or something in the media. But just because these conversations are happening, it doesn't mean that we need to lean on Black people and non-Black people of color to do all of the heavy lifting. Their life, their survival, and their continued push for justice are a manifestation of the work being done today and the work that was done by their ancestors. Yet this is still not enough to heal our racial divides. Right now, we see that it is absolutely critical for white families to begin to talk about race with their kids in a way that prepares them to act, to foster cross-cultural partnerships, and to acknowledge, welcome, and respect their non-white peers as true equals. It's true, we are one human race, but we haven't historically treated everyone in this manner. Therefore, in our effort to improve race relations, we cannot gloss over the deep, painful, strategic, and historic actions that have created this moment we are living in today. We have to address intentional and complicit actions supported by policies, individuals, and institutions that result in today's divides in healthcare outcomes, educational quality, voting experiences, and wealth distribution across racial groups. My first bit of advice for talking to kids about race: build their empathy muscle. Increase their capacity for compassion and responsiveness to another human experience. We need to simplify our desires to improve race relations by establishing race as a pillar of social emotional learning in our homes, our schools, and in our communities. When we talk to any kid about race, the goal is to equip them with the tools to acknowledge and respect differences, connect with others on equal footing, and exercise the courage to address injustice when we see it. Very simply put, don't be colorblind, don't be a savior, and don't be a coward when you see that someone of a different race is being treated unfairly. Do engage in the hard work, awkwardness, and discomfort of interpersonal relationship building. Standing in solidarity does not require you to fully understand everything someone is going through. Your goal is not to become an expert on race in America or the world. Your objective is to get kids to think critically about injustice and think bigger than just themselves. We should want our children to grapple with questions like,
in what ways do different people experience society as it is constructed today? How do we make it better?
Is the range of human experiences fair, just, equal, or equitable? Why or why not?
Who is not here right now? Who's not part of the group?
Am I making choices that will prevent or exclude another person from a quality life experience?
What is my commitment to improving life for people near and far that are experiencing pain in their life?
You've got a long road ahead. So here are a few very simple strategies to prepare adults to have meaningful conversations with their kids.
Approach discussions about race with impact in mind.
Think, what do I want to come out of this conversation that is actionable? Action is possible for a child of any age. The younger the child, the more you want to focus that child's thought process on how to build community, be less selfish, and create inclusive spaces. Once you've laid that foundation, you can begin to tackle more complex issues of injustice and racism.
Become an avid reader of a range of perspectives on race and culture, allowing Black and non-Black people of color to speak for themselves.
The easiest way to talk about race with kids is to expose our kids to other people's triumphs and challenges. Find narratives that breathe life into the variety of perspectives available in cultures and communities that are not your own. When we have a catalog of what is possible, we begin to dissolve our assumptions about who people are.
Center the voices of others.
Again, at its core, improving race relations is all about building our empathy muscle. Show kids that their perspective isn't the only important voice in the room, and that stepping aside and empowering others does not take away from their own power. When we decentralize how we feel, what we believe, what we value, we give space in our minds and in our hearts to actually listen to others, their perspectives, and their challenges. Talking to your kids about race is the first step in a long journey of work that is required of each of us. Some of this work needs to be done in the home, some of it at school. Some work must be done in our own racial groups, and some work must be done collaboratively across cultures and divides. All of this work is necessary. All right, so we're going to move into the family discussion about race. We do want to say that we don't want anyone to assume that white families know nothing about race, that Black and non-Black people of color know everything about race. You know, the most important thing is that each and every one of us is on a journey to learn more about how we can just be better people and improve society for everyone. So we kind of want to throw that disclaimer out there. All right, lived experience is important though, right? And so we will speak from our own, experience, right? What we know. Okay. All right, so let's get this party started. We're going to start with a definition. Can you define race and racism? Let's start with just racism. How would you define racism?
I would define racism as when a race thinks that they're superior to another race or a multitude of other races that don't look like them or don't sound like them or don't speak the same language as them, even though we're all equals.
What do you think?
I think that racism is, for example, if a Black person said, Black people are better because they, Black people are the only one who get good grades and white people don't. That's racism. The opposite way is racism too, because it would be offending someone if you said.
I want to add on to both of them. I'm going to actually put them both together because that's what I want to say. It's when you think your group of people, your race is better than another race, and some people make false accusations and some people make false rumors about races to make them seem better than others, even if it's not true. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. I appreciate you guys sharing all that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. All right. So we're going to move to our next question. When something racist happens, right, how should you address it?
I think you should address it not in a way where you fight the person. I think that you could say it where hey, I don't think if they didn't know that was racist, you could be oh wait, did you mean to say that or were you just kidding? And they could say if they meant it or not.
So you're giving another person the benefit of the doubt.
And another chance.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. How about you guys? When something racist happens, how should you address it? How would you address it? Not should, but how would you address it?
You should tell the person that what they're saying or doing is wrong, and tell them that just because you think your race is better than someone else's doesn't mean it's true.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So we're going to move to our next question. When racial violence occurs, like violence against George Floyd or the violence that happened against Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, kids sometimes have questions. So why is it important for parents to talk about scenarios like this, in instances like this with their kids?
I think they should talk about it because the children should be prepared for the world. And if they don't be prepared for what's actually out there, they'll feel like, oh, it's just a happy candy wonderland when it's actually a really harsh world out there.
That's a very, very interesting response. How about you?
You should remind them that certain groups have a harder time living in the world, so that they know, like, that not everybody, like Sophia said, is having a good time all the time.
So kind of like building up our empathy for others, and
it's not just a candy world.
Yeah, and making sure that people are aware of what other people are going through. Okay, people do not get along all the time, right? So, what are some ways that people can improve relationships between races and cultures?
You can change relationships by doing something as a group activity for different races. For example, at our school, we have International Night where we all dress up as our culture and what people wear in our culture. And this year, we made dolls inspired on our culture.
So part of that would be teaching and sharing your culture with someone else.
And also making sure that, people can also learn your culture, and, if they knew something, wrong about it, they can learn, how it actually is. For example, say you think that this is not real, but say you think all black people play with cars. Well, actually, when say you go to International Night and you say, oh, not all black people play with cars,
So kind of providing a space for someone to unlearn maybe negative or just totally untrue and biased things about cultures.
Yeah.
That's cool. The beautiful thing about technology is that we can see life from someone else's perspective. We can literally walk in someone else's shoes, which is really cool. So we watched a lot of the protests on Snapchat. What are some of the things that you saw, or what are some of the similarities and differences, or what were things that stood out for you watching protests on Snapchat?
Well, what stood out to me was that some of the protests, the places that got darker or were on different hemispheres, when it got darker, it kind of got more violent. Maybe because people couldn't really see them, it was more violent because you could get away with more stuff. But I think that was kind of interesting.
So you noticed that as night began to fall, there was a lot more negative energy going on, right?
Yes.
All right. So what did you see? What are some things that you saw?
People were standing on the side of the road just with signs. Some people were just moving along. Some people were chanting and holding signs up and walking together. Most of them had masks on because it's still coronavirus season.
Some people were still being safe, which is good.
Yeah.
Did you notice anything?
What I noticed is I kind of noticed what Garby noticed, because some people were just standing and chanting and holding up signs. Some of them the police joined them. Some of them the police were just holding up those shields, and trying to not fight with anyone. They were mostly just peaceful.
So we're going to move into kind of when is it age appropriate, I guess, to talk about race. We've been talking about race since you guys have realized that you were brown, but also once you guys went to school, we started talking about race. So I guess, once you went into kindergarten. I kind of want to ask, but some people haven't. Some people do not talk about race until it comes up and they cannot ignore it anymore, or they never talk with their kids about race. So, what do you say? What do you think if a parent has a middle schooler and they haven't talked about race yet?
If you have a middle schooler and you haven't even mentioned race in your household, I'm honestly disappointed.
Why?
Because if your child, like me, has a phone and they're on social media, they're on TikTok, they're probably already seeing racial and racist things on the internet. So it's better if you, and you're not there, so it's better if you beforehand, before you let them go off on their own, tell them about it so that they're not surprised when they see it.
That's a very great point. What do you want to add?
Also be like, if you have a middle schooler that like and you haven't talked about race, any time is still a good time to start. Like, just because they have left elementary school and they're on social media and stuff doesn't mean that you can't still talk to them about race. It's like, until they leave your house, you can still talk to them and you can still give them that lesson so that they're not ignorant when they leave your house.
That is a very excellent point. Like, you want to make sure that even if you haven't started yet, that you get started now. I really like that point. You can start at any time.
I'm far from being a middle schooler, but I think that, kind of like what Governor Naima said, that a lot of middle schoolers, since people are in 8th grade and 7th grade, they probably are like teenagers, right? So they already know, probably either from their friends or from the websites parents sometimes let them go on, that like social media or Snapchat or even TikTok, that racial issues, because those websites spread, even though they're not just in their website, because you could hear from your friends. They could send you something and you'll be like, oh, cool, and then you tap on it and like it shows something racial or something that's like racial violence.
So what you're saying is, because social media is a thing, right, that kids are being exposed to not only their friends' ideas and opinions about race, whether that's good or bad, but they're also being exposed to the world and what outside, things. Right, and even adult ideas, good or bad, about race.
And racial issues.
And racial issues. Wow, okay. You guys are so wise. I really, really love it. So we're going to move to our next question. You know, what can parents then do if they do not know enough to talk about race at home with their kids, right? Like, we're telling people, have these conversations. You know, what can parents do if they're like, I don't know?
What parents can do is, I think what they can do is research more, because on websites, because like, even like, you should never say something not true, because then your children or someone will act on that. Like, if you said something that isn't true about black people or white people, then you would, and if it's wrong, you would be the one to blame.
Just, can I add to that? Parents should let their kids know and have them acknowledge that each person is different. So my mom uses this analogy where about sandwiches. All sandwiches go under the category of sandwich, but each sandwich is different. So to acknowledge that each sandwich is different is like acknowledging that each person is different.
Right. So you want to make sure that if you don't know where to start about race, or you don't have enough knowledge, the first very basic thing you can do is, instead of saying like, oh, everybody's the same, or, you know, all lives are valued the same, acknowledging that there are differences between groups of people. In this life. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So we've talked a lot about like what parents can do as far as talking about race with kids, and we haven't really talked about like teachers yet. So, we have one more question. Is it a good idea for kids to discuss race at school? What classes would race come up in, and like, how do you think it should be talked about?
It's important for kids to talk about race at school because what if it will come up in just like a random point in class? Like it could come up in almost any class. Almost meaning like it probably wouldn't come up in like music or like
It might.
PE,
it might come up
but
in
it
music
may
class
come up
in PE class.
but like it doesn't like necessarily, like if you're thinking about it, it might not. But classes like reading, writing, extra like literature classes, and especially like stuff like history class.
I'd
Thank you
like
for that.
to add when she said about music class and PE class, for there's like races of all kind that play instruments and run track, do sports, everything. So actually it could come up in those classes because if somebody's like, well, this person from this race is better than the other person from the other race because they're from that race.
Right. So racial bias in music and PE class, like, oh, well, this person should be good at sports because they're black, or they should be good at this sport because they're white. Okay.
I think that that it can come up in music because there are little songs in music that were for like black people in the history and not slavery, but like so like sometimes it could come up because from a song, for example, if it was a Caribbean song or a Spanish song.
So then
Or
there's an
Hawaiian.
opportunity for students to learn about that culture
That-
because it's a song from that culture.
Even if it's not their culture. Or even if it's from their culture and they didn't know something about the culture that's in the song, maybe they could learn more about their culture.
That's awesome.
And also, I think others and a subject or a few subjects might be social studies or history, science maybe, maybe even writing or reading, because in reading you read lots of different things and you don't know if that's racial or not, or racist or not.
I have a question for all of you guys. Random question. What if you're reading and none of the reading is about anyone from your culture? How does that make you feel? If you're doing all this reading all year long and there's no reading about anyone from your culture, how does that make you feel?
It kind of makes me feel like it's not bad, but like
Left out?
for example, if there are a bunch of my friends' cultures that had a song, and I was the only one who didn't have a song for my culture, I'd be kind of left out.
I'd also feel left out because each race should have their own books because every race deserves to be represented.
So then should you only read books about your race, or
No.
should everyone read books about everybody's
This
race?
also refers back to if you don't know about a certain race, you can also research it by reading books from other people from other races who are talking about their race so that you're more educated about it.
So in school is a great place that can expose people to different kind of races in the curriculum just by the fact that you have it in there. Is that what you guys are saying? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Okay. Do you want to add something?
Yes. It's also important that we know, like, some people are like racially biased to their race or a certain race. So obviously if like most of the people who write books are racially biased to, like, say the colonists, they're going to write books about these Italian and British colonists. If they were biased to the Native Americans, they would have written books about Native Americans. If they were biased to the Spanish, and so on and so forth. But we need to have more people who are non-racially biased to write these books, because people need to read and learn about every single culture. They shouldn't be coming out of high school or coming out of even like preschool to like college uneducated about cultures that are not their own.
So you're saying that people who write the curriculum that kids are going to read about also need to do some work with their understanding with race.
Yes.
Girl, you gotta go to work.
Work.
Okay, guys. I don't know if this episode is one that we really want to break out in song, but we will leave it in there because people probably need a mental break. We covered a lot in this discussion, and we still haven't covered enough. So, at some point we'll have another discussion about this, right? With other topics and other questions. So thank you guys for being so candid and vulnerable and honest. I really, really appreciate you guys' words of wisdom.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you guys. We do not have all of the answers, and neither will you. Each family has its own journey to take and will have their own challenges to overcome when faced with deepening their understanding of race. We encourage families to discuss these same questions. As a point of reference, my kids are between 3rd and 6th grade. If you have any cool epiphanies you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments or share them with us on social media. Talking about race is a commitment to healing and a contribution to moving forward. But you must first have the courage to start.
Each episode, we will share quotes that we find inspirational, and we will share what we think they mean.
Rosa Parks was an American activist in the civil rights movement, best known for her pivotal role in the Montgomery bus boycott. The United States Congress has called her the First Lady of Civil Rights and the Mother of Freedom movement. Her quote is, I would like to be known as a person who is concerned about freedom and equality and justice and prosperity for all people. Rosa Parks.
Dorothy Height was an American civil rights and women's rights activist. She specifically focused on the issues of African American women, including unemployment, illiteracy, and voter awareness. She was the president of the National Council of Negro Women for 40 years. My quote is, no one will do for you what you need to do for yourself. We cannot afford to be separate. We need to see that all of us are on the same boat.
My quote is by Angela Davis, an American political activist, philosopher, academic, and author. She is also a college professor at the University of California in Santa Cruz. She wrote over 10 books on class, feminism, and the U.S. prison system. My quote is, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept.
Fannie Lou Hamer was an American voting and women's rights activist, community organizer, and a leader in the civil rights movement. She was the co-founder and vice chair of the Freedom Democratic Party, which she represented at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. Her quote, nobody's free until everybody's free.
What do these quotes mean to you? What's your favorite from the ones we shared? Let us know using the social media hashtag Let's K12 Better.
Thank you for listening to the Let's K12 Better podcast.
Please like, subscribe, and share.
We want to hear from you. Connect with us on social media at Mom of All Capes everywhere, and follow the Let's K12 Better podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Share your thoughts about this episode using the hashtag Let's K12 Better. That's hashtag LETSK12BETTER. You can also find us on your favorite podcasting app.
See you next time.